This point that man is without a directive, that he is an orphan in the storm, that he is a neglected stepchild of eternity, is simply evasion. Every individual has within himself that which knows what is next. Because he has overtone, he cannot be alive unless he is in a field of energy that extends beyond his material body. Nor can he be a thinker, except that he exists in a field of mental or psychic energy which extends out from the now into the immediate future. From the things that have happened to him, from his inevitable conclusions and convictions, from deduction and induction, automatically occurring within him, the individual has a very clear vision, not of great things remote, but of immediate things necessary. And his skill is to gain the power, the incentive to do that which is next. It is the same problem as the Chinese proverb. The longest journey begins with a single step. Each step that we make must be a single step. There is no great 7-league stride for man, but the soul supplies each individual with a picture of the next step for him. For one person it may be a very short and halting step, but it is still a step, and the only step that it is reasonable for him to make. Thus the soul as counselor has advantage over all other counselors. For others outside can know only what they think is right, but the being seeking the leadership of its own soul receives those incentives which are inevitably adapted to that life. The soul in man can only make the next step, and it is this next and inevitable step which the soul within can alone define, regulate, direct, and make immediately and inevitably possible. Because the soul has this strange oracular potential, human beings have long regarded it with a strange, deep, mystical affection. They have sought to understand it. They have really earnestly wished that they might obey its instruction. They recognize remorse as a pain in the soul resulting from wrong conduct. They recognize repentance as the soul's constant reminder that its principles have not been kept. They also gain a certain positive support, a sense of rightness, fitness, and well-being when they sustain the soul and keep its laws. Thus, out of all these experiences, the soul has developed an image which men record within their psychic experience. And one name for this image has been the immortal friend. In some way, the soul is not quite God. It is more like this friendly thing, perhaps implied in the concept of Jesus, who did not refer to his disciples merely as his followers, but called them his friends, his brothers. And the soul is the elder brother of the personality. It is that which, from a somewhat larger perspective, is forever ministering without thought of itself, without selfishness, without ulterior motive. It is the true friend, therefore, because it is that which works forever for our good. Socrates, in defining friendship, pointed out that the friend is not the person who agrees with us necessarily, but the person who inspires us to be greater than our present state. Therefore, the criticism of the sincere friend is more valuable than the applause of fools. It is this sincere friend, therefore, that may bring to us as soul power the twang of conscience, the sense of shame, the realization that we have failed that which is true. Such self-censure, however, should not be a cataclysmic incident. The individual who cannot accept it is very immature. Self-censorship is very vital, the best of all things, because it is proof that the soul lives and that principle still is supreme. This self-censorship calls us back from the numerous byways into which we have wandered and puts our feet again upon the straight road. It is therefore far better that this psychic life within us should occasionally plague us with conscience than that we should be left without this leadership. Because the true friend loves us in spite of our faults, but hopes to help us to mend them. And the contact of the soul and body is not normally broken by any fault of the body. It continues patiently to work its way until experience brings man into conscious realization of value. All over the world there are images to countless deities and saints and sages. And in some mysterious way, these are all crystallizations of man's soul image of the faithful friend. To those who have meditated somewhat deeply upon these subjects, the relationship between the personality and the soul is greatly simplified. Our natural tendency when exploring invisible superiors is veneration, adoration, or worship. But such veneration and adoration is across an interval which we have not bridged. Those who know very little about deity may adore deity. But those who find more and more about these great spiritual values that underlie life come into ever more intimate association with them. Instead of great things being distant and remote, they become intimate, gentle, and kindly, until finally the whole universe moves in upon us as the family friend, something that we honor and respect, but for which and with which we have kinship. For actually, the soul is of our kin. It is of our nature. It may be an elder brother or a kind relation, but it is something also growing, also unfolding, and with which we can have a real and immediate association on the level of friendliness, of understanding. The wiser friend, perhaps, but then only wiser friends are worth the having. And the better friend is the ever-present help, not necessarily because of the things they do for us, but because of the things they make us do for ourselves. They inspire, and inspiration is a motivation to higher psychic activity. So our friend the soul plays many parts in our lives. Very few persons have many friends. And if in the course of living 2 or 3 physical friendships endure, enrich, and become real, then we are indeed fortunate. The reason perhaps why we have not more friends is that we have not greater friendship with the great archetypal association between ourselves and our soul. For the soul is the abode of those relationships which must be refined from possession to renunciation, from passion to compassion, and from personal attachment to impersonal understanding. These growths must happen, and as they do, the model of true friendship emerges, taking its proper place as one of the kindliest, gentlest, and most valuable of all associations, the voluntary union of persons because of common regard. So the psychic friendship in man causes him instinctively to turn to his own inner life as we would externally turn to some valued confidant. The individual wants to pour out his troubles. So internally, he pours them out to his own soul. He wishes to be understood, and he conceives that perhaps of all things, only his soul can understand him. He seeks comfort in time of sorrow. Therefore he becomes quiet and seeks in quietude to establish union with a great source of universal consolation and understanding. In his fatigue, weary with worldliness, or weary with cares and responsibilities, he seeks to cultivate the secret garden of his own soul, helping to grow or to improve the plant that lives there, helping to keep it free from weed and protect it from things likely to destroy or inhibit its function. Thus, instinctively, man leans upon the soul. He leans upon it for all things necessary to motivation, to ideal, to the advancement of good purposes and noble endeavors. And he has learned from bitter experience that if he gains all other things and loses the friendship of his own soul, that he has lost more than he can possibly compensate for by any other accomplishment. So the soul as friend emerges as a pattern, as a symbol of a great teacher, of a gentle associate. And through soul understanding, the immortals gain something of their humanity and come into our lives. The person who is great in soul does not worship greatness. Rather, he recognizes it and honors it with friendship. Friendship for greatness leads not only to the protection of the individual, but to the protection of the great. For we serve those best for whom we have deep and sincere, honest, honorable human regard. It is therefore not good for us to think of the soul only as something infinitely remote and detached, something perfect and divine. It is better for us to think of it as a kind of overself, an immortal friend, something that exists for love of us, and ultimately that we exist and perfect existence for love of it. If then we have this friendship, it slowly results in man creating an imaginary soul person, a person whom he likes now to regard as his real self. This soul person is luminous, beautiful, kindly, good, possessing the richness of every virtue we have only in part. This soul likeness also is sad. It is the weeping God that stood in the Serapeum of Alexandria. It is the eternal good weeping over the world. For this soul is forever saddened by the conduct of its personality. And as parents, though loving children are saddened by their misconduct, yet so saddened still love, still serve, and still endeavor. The soul may appear to us saddened by our own inability to fulfill its works, but it still guides, still leads, and like the good friend, loves us for what we are rather than for what we do. This kind of association gradually creates in man the vision of another kind of human being. By degrees, this soul becomes the composite symbol of humanity. The individual suddenly recognizes that this soul image which he has created alone is human. It is not divine, it is human. And in comparison to that image, man is still struggling to attain his own humanity. Instead of man being the great human model of all things, man realizes that he is a kind of embryo, a being unborn into his own humanity, and that his birth is related to his identification with his own soul concept. Thus the soul is the ideal person, the transcendent being of Chinese thought. And every good, every ideal, every principle that we know and experience becomes a kind of offering brought to the matchless altar of this soul. It becomes clothed with every dream and aspiration that we have. Its vestments are made up of our hopes. Its wisdom stands image to our own understanding. Thus, by degrees, we come to a new concept of ourselves. We see that we have within us an immortal principle of graciousness, of beauty, of ideal, and that it is quite possible to cultivate this, to have it as a constant strength, and that in all things this strength will be modest, that this strength will always be the strength of true nobility, not an offensive manifestation of power, but the quiet dignity of eternal security. But this strength is the strength of soul over body. That soul was born to command, and therefore it must command. It never needs to exert authority, because authority is its natural right. It is not authoritarian. It has no desire to conquer bodies. It is the inevitable leader of bodies, and therefore it waits patiently for the body to accept that leadership which is proper. Nor does it want body groveling before it, or humiliating itself for it. It wants body to establish a strong friendship, a friendship of recognition of values, a friendship which reveals that the body perfects itself in the service of the soul. That without this association, the body is orphaned and is left without directive and leadership necessary to its own maturity. As man gradually crystallizes within his own consciousness the soul image, it becomes to him the symbol of his religious conviction, of his moral code, of his ethical aspiration, and through all these things, of his social orientation. What we call the sick soul is the soul that is prevented from being itself by the burden of pressures thrust against it. The soul restored is not merely restored to physical normal expression. It is restored to leadership over the brain, over the body, and over the works of man. Each individual is in slavery until he becomes the voluntary citizen of the world of souls. We are all in some way responsible. No individual is free in the larger sense of the word. Each person has the right to attain a proper labor and to advance that labor under law. This is his birthright. Not that he shall be truly free as we think, free from responsibility, free to do as he pleases. His freedom is his right to keep the truths he knows. His freedom is his privilege of making a voluntary allegiance to superiors. And this of allegiance, when it is voluntary, does not become serfdom. But when it is involuntary, it becomes slavery. So man has the right to accept the leadership of the best of himself and to follow that leadership where it leads, always realizing that to obey the superior is more advantageous than to obey anything which is secondary, and to achieve the superior is the most important thing which man can do. And out of this achievement comes his security, his peace of mind, his working operative faith, his understanding, his good hope, with all these things which make life rich and valuable while he is here. Thus, he would like to invite the immortal friend into his house. He would like to have the soul come in to dinner. And he therefore would do what every one of us will do, supposing we hear that some important person, some well-respected friend, some influential citizen is going to come to dinner. Immediately the family begins preparation. The first thing that any housewife will do is to clean house. She must have the place immaculate. It must be completely at its best. And everything possible will be done to impress this distinguished guest with the honor, the integrity, the orderliness, the propriety of this house. The same happens when the soul is invited to live with us. We must prepare for it by putting this house of the personality in order. We must give it the necessary house cleaning. We must prepare those things which we feel are proper to the entertainment of the soul. And we must present our house to our distinguished guests as a proper and orderly establishment, which has been lovingly and adequately protected, and is therefore a proper symbol of our respectability. The body, then, must be brought into an orderly state. And when this is true and this is right, we will then have the guest we desire. For we are assured even by the Scriptures that if we build our house according to the law, the eternal God will dwell therein. And even more immediately, if we build our lives reasonably and intelligently, the soul, as the friend, can be invited to dinner, can be invited to come and live in that house as its respected and wonderful blessing and presence. We must prepare, and out of this new union of soul and body, under leadership of soul, man will not only attain good things for himself, but will permit to move through him all these creative impulses and instincts which will order civilization, which will end the plagues of ignorance and war, will help men to learn to respect and understand each other, will solve the problem of man's inhumanity to man. For these things are contrary to the soul, and even while we perform these wrong actions, we experience guilt. And guilt is remorse because we have broken faith with an eternal friend. If we therefore live in this thinking, develop it, and attempt to apply it to ourselves, we will find that every day we can perform some small and gentle service to the soul. This should be our daily worship, not merely that we should clasp our hands in prayer, but that rather each day we shall bring to the altar of the soul some gift, some offering of ourselves, some simple example of a victory of soul over selfishness in our own living. As we build this way, as we become devoutly concerned over these things, we will find life will smooth out, that advantages will increase, that problems will be solved more easily, and that the individual will never be in doubt as to the best and wisest course of procedure for himself. Having this certainty, he is no longer the victim of the opinions of others or the negative motions of his external environment. This way brings the soul into our home. It is always really there, but we do not know it. But by an intentional action, we can bring it into manifestation so that it becomes our faithful friend, our immortal teacher, and actually leads us to the realization that it has always been ourselves, and that through this understanding we rise to our humanity, prepare a better world than we have ever known. Time's up.